Welcome back to the Faith and Work podcast, where we talk about living out your faith in everyday work, your leadership, your family, and your calling. I'm your host, Carole Evans. Whether you're driving to the office, folding laundry, or taking a quick walk between meetings, I'm so glad that you're here today. Because today's conversation is one of the hardest leadership decisions we've ever made, knowing when to walk away from a job, a habit, a commitment, or maybe even a mindset. Even a dream that God is asking you to release so that He can give you something better. Sometimes staying feels noble, but obedience requires leaving. The Bible reminds us in Ecclesiastes 3:6, there is a time to gain and a time to lose, a time to keep and a time to throw away. There are seasons when holding on is faithful and seasons when letting go is the most faithful thing that we can do. Hello and welcome to Faith and Work. My name is Carole Evans and I'm so glad that you're here. Today's episode, we're going to talk about knowing when to walk away and how to walk away. And over the course of the episode, I want to tell you a story about some brothers who had to constantly make decisions to walk away from one thing so that they could succeed somewhere else. The first decision they made was to sell their car to get a $10,000 loan and to start a hamburger restaurant together. And they did. The restaurant grew not just from one restaurant, but to 2 restaurants. It was growing. It was thriving. Things were doing well. But then the one brother was in a plane crash and tragically passed away. Not long after that, several years after, the second restaurant they opened caught fire in the middle of the night and burned to the ground. And the other brother had to make a decision of what to do. Should he open another restaurant just like that? Should he try something new? What should he do? Insurance money wasn't enough. So he made a decision to try something new. But to try something new, we have to quit something that we used to do. And that's really hard. And it's scary. And the other brother took out a $90,000 loan and he tried a new concept. This was a self-service concept restaurant, very different than the burgers and fries and steaks that his customers were used to. And he was so sure it was going to be a success. And people loved the food, but they did not like the self-service. They wanted to know where the waitresses and waiters were. It was a very different concept. And it wasn't doing well. He called a restaurant owner friend and he said, I don't know what to do. And the restaurant owner said, well, you're going to gain some customers and you're going to lose some customers, but if you want, I'll buy that equipment off of you if you want to abandon the idea. And so we did. He sold off the equipment, he closed the restaurant, and he quit one thing to try something else. Throughout the episode, we'll finish the story of this family. But I want you to think about, what has God asked you to walk away from? When as soon as we talked about the episode and as soon as you saw the episode title and you thought, oh, I need this one, or a friend of mine needs this one, or someone in my family needs this one. If you are at a place where you can write down, I want to encourage you to take some notes. I want you to draw a line down a page if you can. Maybe just do this in your mind. On one side of the page, I want you to write down the things that came to your mind when I said, we're going to talk about how to walk away. We're going to talk about how to quit something today. So on the left side of the page, I want you to write down what you need to walk away from. What is it that came to mind as soon as we talked about walking away? What are those things for you? When we think about Scripture references and places we see this in Scripture, sometimes we read stories and we forget that people did actually have to walk away from something to do something else. We have some very popular examples of Moses. Moses left living in Egypt. He ran from living in Egypt to go be a shepherd. But then he was a shepherd for 40 years. And in Exodus 3, he was on the backside of the wilderness. God tells him that he wants him to leave being a shepherd to go lead a nation out of slavery that had been enslaved for 400 years. I can only imagine my response if I were Moses, thinking, God, you have no idea what you're asking me to do. I am a shepherd. I talk to sheep all day long. And that's exactly the point. Sometimes God asks us to do something that seems so big. And it's like, do you know who you're talking to, Lord? That's too big for me. That's too hard for me. Why? Why me? Other people are more equipped. And if other people were more equipped, then it would be about their glory. And it's not. The story of Moses, when we read his account in Exodus, it is not just the story of Moses. It is what God did through Moses. We see this amazing power and this awesome God, not because Moses was so equipped, but because of what God did with somebody who was not equipped. That's why we love the story of Moses. That's why we cheer for Moses. That's why when he goes back into Egypt and we see the plagues, and we won't go into that whole story today, but when you do a deep dive into that story, the symbolism that's there into each of the plagues, when you see everything that happened, when you read the full account and conversation and kind of semi-argument that God and Moses had together, and Moses said, God, there's this reason I shouldn't go. And then God answered him. Then he said, there's another reason I shouldn't go. And God answered it. And he did it over and over and over. And he said, I'm not even well spoken, and you're going to ask me to go stand before the most powerful man in the world at that time, the Pharaoh. And it was almost like I can almost hear Moses in today's vernacular, like, God, do you know who this man is? Not sure if you realize it, but he is very, very, very powerful. And God said, yeah, I know. I'm going to send you Aaron. And it's almost like, I can almost imagine God being like, Moses, I got you. I wouldn't ask you to walk in if I didn't have a plan for you to succeed here. And he did. He had an amazing plan for him to succeed. And we love the story of Moses. But then you have to also think about the story of Abraham. I love the story of Abraham. He left his homeland to make a great nation. God said, I want you to leave where you're from. His dad had just passed away, and he said, I want you to leave where you're from. I'm going to make a great nation out of you. And just a few verses before that, we see Abraham's wife could not have children. And I can only imagine Abraham being like, God, why would I leave where my ancestors are from? And how in the world are you going to make a great nation out of me when you know that I'm married to a woman who is barren and she cannot have children? I think it's amazing how in the text we learn that Sarah is barren before we learn about what God's asked him to do. And it's like the writer is saying, look, this was significant. They knew about this. This was something that was well known. This was not discovered years later. This was a known thing. God knew it. Abraham knew it. Sarah knew it. Everyone knew it. And God still had a plan well beyond what he could have ever asked or imagined. Sometimes God calls us to seasons of change and growth that we often mislabel as quitting. Moses could have felt like he was quitting being a shepherd, and he did. God called him to a season of change, but it was really a season of growth and to growing into a role that he did not even know he was equipped for. Abraham left his homeland, and his wife left her homeland for a season of growth that God would take him on. He had no idea. Some of those promises that God made to him, Abraham saw during his lifetime, and some he never did. But God still kept his promise. There was a season when God asked David and I to walk away from a church that we had been going to. We've been at the church for about 3 years, and we loved it. We had so many good friends there. It was a sweet place. We have a lot of good memories at that church. But there was a season that the church was going through, and the pastor had taken a step back. The youth pastor had taken a step back. The music pastor had taken a step back. All of that happened, I think, about a 3-week time period. And at the same exact time, David and I were going through a very difficult time in our marriage. If you haven't heard that story aired earlier this season. I think episode 1, 2, and 3 is where we talk about our story. So the story I'm telling you now kind of overlaps what was going on then. We were going to a very sweet church, very sweet people. And when all of that was going on in the church, they were looking to David and I to give the church some stability, to really step in and help the church during that time. And we were not at a place to do that. No one knew that we were struggling in our marriage that much, but we were struggling. We were not at a place to help. We were at a place that we needed someone to pour into us. And we came home from church one day, and I remember Dave and I talking, and we were just in tears. And he said, Carole, I think it's time for us to walk away from this specific church right now. And I said, I think so too. And I had to make some phone calls that day. I had some commitments that I had to step away from. And every single phone call, I cried. Every single text, I cried. Because there was nothing wrong with the church. There was nothing wrong with the people. But we were at a season when we needed to be poured into. And that church really needed people that could pour into the church. They needed people who could double down and be there more and serve more. They needed all hands on deck. And we were feeling pretty weak and pretty spiritually anemic. And we both knew it was time to walk away. Now, those people are still our friends. We still talk to them. We still go out to dinner with them. We're still friends with them. We actually had the chance to go back and speak at a marriage retreat last year at that church. And it was such a sweet time for us to be able to do that. It was so sweet and so meaningful with the memories that we had there. We had our son Eli at that church. We really just have sweet memories there. But there was a time when God asked us to walk away. Sometimes we label quitting. We label all types of change as quitting. Whether they're quitting the church or they're quitting their job, they quit the friendship. And I wish in our minds we could somehow replace that term quitting with growing and changing. God asks all of us to do that a little differently. Sometimes it's because of our own personal struggle. Sometimes it's because of strengths we have or because of things that we need other people to pour into us. But today, I want you to think back to that list that you wrote down, either mentally as you're driving down the road, or think about the list that you made and you actually wrote it down on a piece of paper. On the left side of that piece of paper, on the left side of your mind, you wrote down some things that you need to walk away from, things that you need to quit. Maybe it's a habit. Maybe it's a friendship you need to let go of, and you've kept trying to pry that door open, and you keep trying to keep the friendship alive, and you know you need to walk away from it. And God's told you to walk away from it, and you keep saying, hey, let's do lunch. Hey, let's get together. And you know you need to step away from it. And God's told you that, and you keep trying to keep it open because you just like it. What if Moses had said, you know what, I'm going to be a shepherd 3 days a week, and then I'm going to go, lead the nation out of Egypt the other 2 days a week. We think about that and we're like, that's ridiculous. You can't go lead a nation out of bondage and slavery. They've been enslaved for 400 years. You can't do that a few days a week. But we try to do that sometimes. We try to halfway change. And for some of you that are listening, God's told you to completely walk away. Not halfway walk away, to completely walk away. From the church that we went to, we had to completely walk away. We had to align on what we needed in our life, spiritually, for our family, what community we needed to be a part of, and we had to go find that somewhere. And that took a lot of prayer between David and I. It took a lot of crying out to God and saying, God, please give us wisdom and direction. But we had to completely step away, and it was very, very hard. Just because change doesn't come easy doesn't mean it's not the right change to make. Sometimes we think, well, God will make the change easier. Well, the plagues weren't easy. Bringing the children of Israel out of Egypt was not an easy task. It was not like as soon as God told Moses what to do and he knew what to do, just because he made it clear didn't mean he made it easy. Let me say that one more time. Just because God makes it clear doesn't mean God is going to make it easy. want you to ask yourself some questions when you think about walking away. So think about that list that you made on the left-hand side of the page. And then I want you to ask yourself. So if you're writing it down, then write these questions on the right-hand side of the page. What am I afraid of? What am I afraid of? You cannot face your fear until you have identified it. Second question. What would I do if I knew I would succeed? What would I do if I knew I would succeed? Maybe it's a job. Maybe it's a chance on a new opportunity, but you're just scared. You are absolutely scared out of your mind. Right now you're succeeding, and what if you don't? What if you don't? Third question to write down. Are you ready to accept the reality of never changing? Think about the things God asked you to walk away from. And then I want you to ask yourself, what if you never walk away? Are you ready to face that reality? What if you never walk away? God's asked you to walk away from a relationship, maybe a really unhealthy relationship that you've tried to keep alive, and you've thought, I'll walk away when it's the right time. What if it's never the right time? What if you never walk away? Years ago, I worked one of my first office jobs. Actually, it was my first office job, was working as an advocate at a domestic violence shelter. And talk about rewarding. That was one of the most rewarding things I've ever had the privilege of doing. It was very hard. It was the most emotionally taxing job I've ever had, but it was the most rewarding job I have ever had. And every day, I had the privilege of walking women across the street from our office over into the courthouse. And we would get to sit in the judge's chambers, and they would tell their story. And they would get a short-term restraining order until we could go for the full court date, and they would get a full restraining order that would last a year. At the time, there was a short-term one called an ex parte order until you could get the full restraining order that would last a year. And those moms had to make the difficult decision to walk away and to change. And it was hard, and it was scary, and it was dangerous. But they did it. And I saw them take courage and do that every single day that I was at work. I had the privilege of sitting down with women and hearing their stories and watch them quit one thing so that they could say yes to something else, something so much better. And I watched them fight for their families. I watched them get jobs. I watched them try to change their family for the better. I watched them change their future and their children's future. And they knew the stats even better than I did. They knew that they had to fight really, really hard so that their kids would not fall back into the same pattern. They had to fight so hard. And they knew that. But it was so good for me as a young woman and as a young adult to see that, and to see the fight, and to see the courage. And nothing motivated me more than seeing other people work so hard to change their future by the decisions they made that day. That was unbelievably motivational. It was like better than any TED Talk I've ever heard, was seeing their decisions that day that impacted the rest of their life. Hey friends, before we jump back into today's conversation, I want to ask you a quick favor. If this episode or a past episode has encouraged you, would you take just a moment and leave a review or rate the Faith and Work podcast on Apple, Spotify, YouTube, Podbean, wherever you enjoy listening? Your reviews help more people to find these conversations about living out their faith in their everyday work. We are trying to get up to 1,000 ratings and reviews, and if you could help us meet that goal, that would be amazing. We're trying to hit that before we get to season 3, so that would be awesome if you could help us meet that goal. I would so appreciate it. Thank you so much. Let's dive back in. So you've got on your sheet of paper, on the left-hand side, you have things you need to walk away from. On the other side, you have 3 questions. 3 questions, again, are, what am I afraid of? What would I do if I knew I would succeed? Third question, are you ready to accept the reality of never changing. Let's go back to the two brothers for a minute. They had two restaurant locations. Then the one brother died. The second location burned to the ground. The other brother took out a loan for $90,000 to try a new concept that did not work. So then they go back to the original restaurant. They still have the one restaurant. That's the burgers and steak restaurant. And a poultry farmer comes in and he wants to know if they're interested in buying these chicken fillets. The chicken fillets had originally been sold to Delta Airlines, but they were too big to fit on the food trays at Delta Airlines, and Delta said we can't use them because they won't fit on the warmers in the plane. They're too big. So these poultry farmers had all these chicken fillets, and they were looking for restaurants to sell them to. So the owner said, let me see what I can do with these. And he went back in the kitchen, and he remembered years and years earlier, his mother had taken in boarders because they were so poor, his family was so poor, they had people live with them as boarders to help make ends meet. And for 4 years, he perfected a recipe of frying chicken in a pressure cooker, making it very tender, frying it a certain way in peanut oil, just like his mom did. And he made what we now know as the classic Chick-fil-A sandwich. The full story, I would encourage you to go look up. It's unbelievable. The Cathy brothers had constant iterations of change. It was Truett Cathy's sister that said, you need to have your own Chick-fil-A restaurant. He was selling these chicken sandwiches to other people, and then he decided to start a restaurant. But did you know that he actually had the first restaurant in a mall? And he had to go to the designers of the mall, and they said, we don't think a restaurant in a mall is really going to work because there'll be too much smoke. No one's going to want to eat as they're walking around a mall. And he convinced them to do it, to try it. So he said no to selling this very successful sandwich to other restaurants. Other restaurants were selling his Chick-fil-A sandwich. But he said, I can't guarantee the quality. So he stopped that method and tried something new. He tried his own restaurant in a mall, and it was an overnight success. Then they tried a few more malls, and then they tried their first stand-alone restaurant in Atlanta, Georgia, and it was a success. Then they tried their first drive-thru restaurant, and it was a success. Today, Chick-fil-A has over 2,000 locations. They sell more food per door than any other fast food restaurant in the country, including Starbucks, which is pretty impressive. My family loves Chick-fil-A. We actually had Chick-fil-A this morning for breakfast. I'm recording this on a Saturday, and my husband got up and went and got the family Chick-fil-A breakfast, and we sat around and watched a Building Off-Grid together. It's one of our favorite family shows. And we ate some Chick-fil-A chicken sandwiches for breakfast this morning. But at the time that Truett Cathy was selling chicken sandwiches, beef was much more popular. That's why they had a hamburger and steak restaurant. What moved me the most by his story was a constant need to quit one thing to try something new. And we look at Chick-fil-A now and we think, wow, look at that drive-thru line. I bet Chick-fil-A is making millions, and they are. But if it wasn't for one man's courage to constantly quit one thing to try something new, what if he had just said, I am perfectly happy and content with the success that I have of this hamburger restaurant? It was a success. It was doing great. But it wasn't just about doing great. It was constantly being open and willing to quit one thing to try something new. They had a steak restaurant. They had this burger place, but it burned down. And they could have said, you know what? This is too hard. We had a fire. My brother died in a plane crash. This is too hard. I'm just going to get a regular job. This is too much. but he was willing to take a risk and quit one thing to try something new. You see, if you have been to Chick-fil-A and you've enjoyed Chick-fil-A, then you know that they are known for their customer service. They are known for saying, "It's my pleasure." They are known for always being so gracious. My niece, shout out to Claire, works at Chick-fil-A. So if you go through that Chick-fil-A line, please be kind to all the teenage employees. This is for most of them. This is their first job, so please be kind. Just going to throw that little plug out there. But you know, one of the reasons why customer service is such a big deal to Chick-fil-A and why it's a big deal for Truett Cathy before he passed away? Because you see, when he tried that restaurant that didn't work, that self-service restaurant, the one that he got out of loan for $90,000 to try, it was self-service. And people wanted to know where the waiters and waitresses were because they wanted customer service. And he said, "I have made a mistake. I've taken away the customer service that people want." And so at every restaurant iteration that he did, they made sure there was that element of customer service. Isn't that amazing? Something that we now love and know about Chick-fil-A came from what at the time probably felt like a failure. It felt like something he took out a $90,000 loan for, and then it didn't work, it flopped. But it didn't flop. He still learned a great, great deal from it. And it has now become one of the cornerstone pillars that make Chick-fil-A, for me anyway. I'm not sure if they would claim that on their website, but that's what I think about Chick-fil-A. That is a big difference between Chick-fil-A and Zaxby's. My boys love Zaxby's. I don't care for Zaxby's as much for many reasons, but I don't like the sauce as much. But Chick-fil-A, I like the sauce. I like that it's always clean. I like that people are friendly, people are kind, they smile at me when they bring me my food. That's important to me. That's really important. Customer service is important. I will pay more for my chicken sandwich because they're kind, because they're nice, because there's an element of customer service there. So how do we live out our faith in our work? We invite God to it. We invite Him into the season of change. Think about that list that you made in your left-hand side of your mind or the page that you're writing on. And I want you to dedicate some time in prayer over that list. God, what are you asking me to quit? Make it clear. Make it plain. It feels like a cliche. Even writing down my notes, I thought, man, this feels like a cliche to say. Have you prayed about it? But really, have we honestly talked to the God of the universe about these seasons of change? My time in my car as I'm driving down the road is my favorite time to pray. I'm not distracted. My phone's not going off typically. If it is, I ignore the calls. And I just enjoy that time in prayer. I don't really mind the traffic as much because it just gives me more time in the car to pray about it. If God's asking me to change a process at work, if He's asking me to make a significant change, I use that time to stop and to pray. And then sometimes you just have to pray and then you have to shut your mouth and just listen to see what He's saying back. We don't do that as often as I think we should. And I say that looking at myself in the mirror here, not literally but figuratively. I have to stop and give myself time to really listen and stop talking and just listen. We need to tell Him about our fears and our failures. When you wrote down that list of things that you needed to walk away from, and then I asked you the question about what you're afraid of, you need to voice that out loud to God. You need to say, this is what I'm afraid of. This is what scares the heck out of me. What is it that keeps you from trying? Are you afraid that you'll be lonely if you walk away from that friendship? If we could change the negative connotation from quitting to changing the season, maybe the next time God asks us to walk away from something, it wouldn't be quite as scary. I want you to ask yourself 3 questions. If I fail, can God still use it? If I fail, am I done? If I fail, can I get back up? Sometimes walking away will only make sense to you. But what if you stay too long? What if you stay too long? I've seen people stay too long at jobs. Sometimes they make an excuse for not taking a job that was a great opportunity for them. Man, it was such a great opportunity. And they'll turn down the job and they think that they're doing someone a favor and they'll say, oh, I just stayed for the team. Or I stayed because the project would have fallen apart if it wasn't for me. Or this whole place would fall apart if it wasn't for me. I've heard statements like that. But then what happens when they stay too long is that then they start to get really frustrated with everyone else around them. They start nitpicking little things and things start bothering them and things start annoying them that are silly and they're small. But God opened up a chance for them to walk away and they turned it down. Maybe because of fear, maybe because of pride, who knows why. But I've seen them stay in jobs too long. Sometimes they applied for a job within the company and they didn't get it. And they thought, okay, my chances are over. Or whatever it is people tell themselves when they don't get a certain job. And sometimes that was a sign that your chance to grow, maybe you are ready for growth, but there was one position and 5 people that were qualified and they couldn't all get it. And it is okay to look for a job and look for something you're qualified for at a different company. It is okay to do that. But then they get mad at the company and they stay too long and they sit in their seat and they're angry and they're bitter. Why? Why do we do that to ourselves? Like we're doing somebody a favor. We're not doing anybody a favor. If you're sitting in your seat every day and you're angry, you are not serving your team well. You're not serving the company well. And you're not serving God's will for your life well. God literally has opened up doors for you to walk away. And some of you are so stubborn, you won't do it. Don't refuse a season of change because of fear. Don't refuse a season of change because of other people. And don't refuse a season of change because you're comfortable. 2 Timothy 2:17 says, God has not given us a spirit of fear, but power and love and a sound mind. Proverbs 29:25 says, the fear of man brings a snare. And I love this verse from Proverbs 3:5-6. Trust in the Lord with all of your heart and lean not in your own understanding. When I lean into my own understanding, I stay in my comfort zone because it's what I know and it's what I can control. And I'm solid there. I'm set there. When I lean into my own understanding, I just stay right there. If you're thinking about other people in your life, what are they going to say? They aren't you. They aren't you. And God has a plan for you. And it's your job to follow it. He has a plan for them too, but that's not your job. Your job is to follow his plan for you. May not be a 2-year plan or a 5-year plan or a 10-year plan. I love a good color-coordinated Excel spreadsheet. And if it has charts and graphs, oh, that's even so much better. If they're color-coordinated, oh, I love a good color-coordinated Excel spreadsheet. It just does my heart so much good when I see that. It makes me so happy. If anyone on my team is listening right now, oh, they know. I love it when when there's a little legend at the bottom of the spreadsheet and it tells me what all the colors mean. Oh my goodness. It gets me so excited. I love it so much. And if they're listening, I'm sure they're dying laughing right now because they know if they're showing me a project or we're looking at an initiative together, if there is a spreadsheet and it has some graphs, and then it has like the blue is the growth in the future, the orange is the current, the red is what we're concerned about, the gray is the past. I love all of that. I love a little legend in the bottom right-hand corner or the left-hand side that has a little thing that tells me what everything is. Oh, I just love it so much. But that's not how life works all the time. That's how work works. That's not how life works. Right now, I know the season that my 2 boys are in. We are in a basketball-loving season. We are into spelling words and reading books every day, and we're trying to get our homework done, and that's the season of life that I'm in right now. I don't know what next year will look like. I don't know academically what that will look like. Eli, we're in a season of speech therapy for him. There's a few sounds and blends that we're working through when we found a wonderful speech therapist here in the area. Cannot thank her enough. She's been wonderful. We've only had one session, and it was so, as a mom, to see your child start to make little steps of improvement, but to do it with the sweetest, spirited professional who just knows what they're doing and they have a heart for their job. It just did my heart so good to see that. It was amazing. Cassidy, you are amazing. But that's the season I'm in right now. I don't know what next year brings. I have no idea. At work, it's a lot more predictable. Now, there's still a lot of unpredictability in the cell phone industry, but we generally know when certain things every year happen. We know that certain pieces of hardware need to be replaced. We know what our budget looks like. We know what our team looks like. We know where the current store footprint is. There's certain pieces of information that we know are set, and then as new information is added, we make changes around that information. But here's the deal. Sometimes when God asks us to walk away from something or to change something, we don't always know what that next 2 to 5 year plan looks like. And we want to know. I want to see everything in that color-coordinated spreadsheet. I'm sure Moses did too. I'm sure Abraham would have too. I'm sure David would have. Do you know if you read the text about David? David was anointed king, and then he went out to fight Goliath. And then he was called to write beside Saul, to play psalms for him, to calm his spirit. And he did all of that knowing he'd been anointed king, but nothing was happening. I'm sure he was like, God, the sequence of all this stuff makes no sense. And it didn't to anybody but God. So a couple of things as we close. Don't refuse a season of change because of fear. Don't refuse a season of change because of other people. And number 3, don't refuse a season of change just because you're comfortable. For some of you, there may be nothing that God brought to mind that you need to change. Maybe right where you are right now is right where you're supposed to be. That's great. But for some of you, as soon as we talked about knowing when to walk away, and I ask you to write down the list of things on the left-hand side, for things you needed to walk away from, you have several things on that list. I'm going to ask you to take courage and to make those changes. This week, take one step to walking away from what God has already told you to walk away from. Take one step. You don't have to take the full step this week. Maybe you can. Maybe you're at a place where you can fully step away from what He's told you this week. Some of you just need to take one step. Take one step. Thank you so much for joining us on today's episode of the Faith and Work podcast. It is always an honor to spend this time with you as we learn how to live out our faith in work, in our homes, and everyday leadership. I want to leave you with this verse from Colossians 3:17. And whatever you do in word or deed, do all in the name of the Lord Jesus, giving thanks to God the Father through Him. Friends, whatever step God is asking you to take this week, whether it's staying, starting, or walking away, do it in His name and trust Him with the outcome. Next week, I cannot wait for you to hear the conversation with my sweet friend, Mary Elizabeth Noggle. She shares her journey of stepping into full-time homeschooling, not just as something that she tried, but as her full-time calling and career. Her story of joy and faith and commitment to bringing God into their family rhythms is beautiful and challenging in the best way. I am not a homeschool mom, and I left the conversation so encouraged, and I know her story is going to bring you some encouragement and joy as you listen. No matter what part of the journey of life you're on right now, there's no way to listen to Mary Elizabeth talk and just not smile and not walk away encouraged. So don't forget to tune in next week for that. Thank you again for being here. I'm praying for clarity and courage and peace over you this week as you live out your faith in your work, in your homes, and in your calling. I'll see you next week.